The great hall glows with floating candles and restless whispers. Hundreds of eyes follow a small boy with round glasses and a faded scar as he walks toward a battered old hat. It drops over his eyes, cutting off the light, and the world shrinks to a dry voice in his ear that knows more about him than any adult ever has. The voice tastes his courage, his stubbornness, his talent for breaking rules when they feel unfair. But it also finds something else coiled deep inside him, something sharpened by years in a cupboard and nights listening for footsteps on the stairs. A fierce will to survive, a quiet instinct to read people before they hurt him, a readiness to use whatever advantage he gets. To this ancient piece of thinking cloth, that combination does not point upward to red and gold. It curls naturally toward green and silver. The decision is not heroic or tragic, it is simply logical. The word that erupts through the hall is the one nobody expected to hear attached to the boy who lived. For a heartbeat, the silence is louder than any cheer. Then the table draped in green and silver explodes in applause. Some clap out of genuine excitement, some because they know what this means for their house, and a few because they are already calculating how to turn one boy's fame into their own benefit. At the other tables, faces fall. A red-haired boy who shared sweets on the train looks like he has been personally betrayed. A girl who memorized every book on the school list stares like a carefully built theory has just shattered. At the staff table, certain adults trade brief, tight-lipped glances. A plan that relied on one path must now adapt to another. That is the moment everything diverges. Not the prophecy, not the shape of the scar or the strength of the enemy waiting beyond the horizon. Only this: which common room Harry walks into on his first night, which staircase he climbs, which crest sits over his heart as he grows up. The rules of this alternate story are simple. The prophecy still names him. The wand still chooses him. The enemy still hunts him. But the house that shapes his daily life, his friendships, and his view of power is no longer the one known for daring and reckless heroics. It is the one the rest of the school whispers about. Houses at this school are more than colored ties and friendly competitions. They are social ecosystems. They decide who shares your table, whose secrets you overhear, whose dreams you learn against your will. One house prizes boldness, charging ahead even when the odds are absurd. Another prizes ambition, strategy, a refusal to be trapped by other people's expectations. Harry carries traits that fit both, but now he is surrounded by people who celebrate the second set out loud. Studies of how groups shape identity highlight something uncomfortable and powerful. When a person is labeled, that label changes not only how others treat them, but how they see themselves. Being told you belong to a brave house nudges you toward public acts of courage. Being told you belong to a cunning house pushes you toward quiet calculations and long games. On the train, the shift has already begun. In one version of events, Harry spends the ride with a lonely boy from a big family, sharing stories and jokes that turn into instant friendship. In this version, a pale, confident boy reaches his compartment first, flanked by heavier footsteps and sharper eyes. The conversation that follows is a mix of flattery, half-truths, and pure-blood gossip. When certain families are criticized and others praised, Harry does not cut the boy off as harshly as he once did. He is too hungry for guidance, too aware of how ignorant he is about this new world. The friendship that might have formed across house lines instead starts here, under a subtle pressure to pick a side before he understands the map. By the time the Sorting Hat places him at the table of green and silver, the path of least resistance runs right beside a boy whose smirk has not yet hardened into cruelty. Life in the Slytherin common room begins under the lake, in strange green light filtered through the water. The room is all stone, shadow, and low conversations that stop when strangers walk past. Fame follows Harry inside like a floating banner, but it lands differently here. In another house, his name would have brought easy admiration. Here, it brings a complicated mix of envy, calculation, and grudging respect. Older students look over, assessing whether he is an asset worth protecting or a rival whose presence might ruin carefully balanced hierarchies. One thing becomes clear quickly. Being famous does not mean being safe. It means being noticed. And in a house where knowledge is power, being noticed makes you a target for recruitment, manipulation, or both. Teachers adjust in subtle ways. In Potions, the dark-eyed professor sees the famous boy seated among the green and silver robes of his own house. Old grudges still twist behind his gaze. The shape of the scar still stirs ghosts of a woman he once loved. But the sight of that boy under the banner of his house hits a different nerve. It is an intrusion and an opportunity. In front of the class, the harshness does not soften. If anything, the bar rises. Mistakes earn sharper words, not gentler treatment. A student from another house can be dismissed as a fool. A student from your own reflects on your house's standard. Snape expects more. That expectation is not kind, but it is powerful. It forces Harry to learn potions not as a battleground for humiliation, but as a set of tools too dangerous to leave entirely in other hands. Across the hall, the strict but fair Transfiguration professor watches all this with a different conflict. She remembers holding this boy's bundle of blankets once, years ago. She imagined a certain color around his neck. Now she sees him climbing the stairs to a rival tower at night. Bias is not something teachers like to admit to, but it leaks out in the small decisions. Who gets the benefit of the doubt? Who is given a second chance? Who is quietly trusted with responsibility? A boy from the house she once called her own might have earned indulgence. A boy from the house that produced many of the school's worst bullies will have to work twice as hard to convince her he is not becoming one of them. The first flying lesson becomes a performance with higher stakes. The broom still snaps into Harry's hand with eager obedience. The rush of air in his ears is still intoxicating. But when he kicks off the ground, he is not just showing off to a friend. He is proving himself to an entire table, waiting to see whether the boy who lived is a trophy or a disappointment. When he dives after a falling object or pulls off an instinctive stunt, the roar that goes up comes from different mouths. Instead of open, delighted cheering, he hears sharp, impressed laughter. The satisfied approval that predators feel when they see one of their own display speed. That sound teaches him something subtle. Courage is fine, as long as it can be framed as control and superiority. Without a ready-made friendship with the red-haired boy from the train, Harry's days unfold in quieter, more uncertain patterns. The other boy still exists, still cracks jokes, still plays his part in a noisy house full of siblings. But he looks across the hall at dinner and sees Harry sitting under a banner his family has always associated with cruelty and dark wizards. It feels, to him, like watching someone he briefly recognized choose a side against him. Distance and resentment grow in the spaces where shared classes could have turned into shared secrets. They still talk. They may even end up working together in some lessons. But it takes far longer for trust to spark, and when it does, house rivalry constantly threatens to snuff it out. The brilliant girl with the overflowing schedule becomes a bridge between worlds. She questions everything, including her own assumptions. She teaches Harry the value of rules, while he teaches her when rules are tools rather than chains. Their dynamic grows through quiet study sessions, late-night debates, and shared fears about what the castle is becoming. When danger rises, their loyalty does not come from childhood accident. It comes from repeated, intentional choices. And then there is the pale boy from the train. That relationship is no longer a simple rivalry scripted by tradition. It becomes a mirror. Every year, each choice they make reflects on the other. In victory, in humiliation, in the looming shadow of families tied to dark powers, the two boys observe each other like rivals studying the battlefield. Sometimes they are uneasy allies. Sometimes they are bitter opponents. But the tension between them becomes a lens through which the entire school watches the larger conflict unfold. When one of them wavers on the edge of darkness, The other sees the risk not as destiny, but as a choice waiting to be redirected. Through all of this, Harry grows into a different kind of strategist. In the original timeline, he often stumbles into danger with reckless courage. In this one, courage is shaped by caution. He interrogates motives, he scans rooms for traps, he learns how to move information without drawing attention to himself. These skills do not erase his heart, they strengthen it. Because when he does take a risk, it is calculated, not blind. When he stands up to cruelty, it is not to display virtue, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And when he finally faces the darkest wizard the world has ever known, he does so with the insight of someone who has lived inside the very house the enemy once claimed. Friends have to learn to trust someone who wears the colors they were raised to fear. Enemies have to understand that a boy in green and silver cannot be predicted by stereotypes. And the wizarding world has to accept that the path to heroism is not limited to the banners people cheer for. Harry's years in Slytherin show that ambition does not have to curdle into cruelty. Strategy does not have to serve domination. And survival instincts can grow into something noble when guided by empathy rather than ego. The war that rises around him is not a distant storm, but a pressure that grows inside classroom walls, in hushed conversations, in glances exchanged between students who suddenly realize their families may soon be on opposite sides of history. By the time the fourth year arrives and a deadly tournament is forced upon the school, Harry is no longer the confused boy who wandered under the lake light of the common room on his first night. He has become someone who reads intentions as sharply as spellbooks, someone who understands that danger rarely announces itself with fanfare. When his name bursts from the goblet, the silence that follows is colder than the night outside. In the original timeline, students from other houses suspect him of cheating. Here, the suspicion is sharper and more vicious. A Slytherin champion looks, to many, like the natural result of secret planning. Some whisper that his house helped him exploit loopholes. Others claim the goblet bent to the ambition that clings to his house like a shadow. Even some of his own classmates regard him as either an opportunity or a liability. For the first time, he sees clearly how easily ambition can twist into paranoia. When he meets the eyes of the pale boy from the train across the hall, he sees something new there. Not mockery, not envy, but a flicker of respect mixed with fear. The tournament's first task demands both bravery and calculation, and both traits settle naturally in Harry now. Standing before a dragon that roars like a living furnace, he does not rely solely on instinct. He watches how it moves, how its eyes track motion, how its weight shifts before it strikes. When he mounts his broom and darts across the enclosure, he moves not only with instinctive skill, but with the knowledge of someone who has learned to turn observation into advantage. The victory that follows is not just a triumph of courage, it is a display of strategic mastery that even the harshest critics must acknowledge. Younger Slytherins watch him differently afterward. He is still an outsider to some, but he is their outsider. Proof that brilliance does not have to rot into cruelty. The second task tests not force but values. Beneath the lake, where water muffles sound and light fractures into ghostly beams, Harry swims toward the hostages held beneath the surface. The person he must save is someone other houses mock, belittle, or ignore. Choosing to save them and lingering to help others even when it costs him points challenges the very hierarchy his house often reinforces. Ambitious students scoff at the lost advantage, but others feel something shift. A house built on reputation sees a member choosing compassion over victory, and the contradiction forces a reevaluation. If ambition can bend toward empathy, what else might be possible? And then the graveyard. The cold stone, the circle of hooded figures, the rebirth of a dark wizard who has shaped Harry's life since before he could walk. The villain's gaze lingers not only on Harry's scar, but on his colors, the green and silver that once belonged to him. In this version of the story, the temptation he offers carries a different weight. He speaks of destiny, of legacy, of a house that could rise under Harry's leadership. He offers a throne carved from fear, a future where Harry need never be hunted again. But Harry has lived inside the house the villain glorifies. He has seen the brittle pride, the inherited hatred, the cracks under the surface of every swaggering claim. He knows that power offered by a monster is only a chain wrapped in silk. His refusal is quiet but unshakable. It is not defiance born from recklessness, but rejection grounded in understanding. Returning to the school after witnessing the villain's return, Harry faces a new kind of battlefield. Authorities who refuse to believe him find it easier to dismiss a Slytherin than a Gryffindor. They whisper about instability, manipulation, fame hunger. They point to his house as proof that he is unreliable. Newspapers spin tales that fit their bias. Students who once admired his tournament feats now avoid him, terrified of being associated with someone they are told is dangerous. The isolation that follows burns deeper than the physical wounds he brought back. But it also crystallizes something inside him, a refusal to let others dictate the meaning of his house or his identity. When the ministry plants a smiling tyrant in the school, Harry does not rise in loud rebellion. He studies her patterns, her allies, her weak spots. He builds a resistance not through theatrics, but through networks, careful planning, coded messages, hidden rooms. Students from every house join him, including a handful of Slytherins who are tired of being treated like criminals in waiting. This cross-house alliance grows not through charisma, but through necessity and trust earned over years of conflict and contradiction. Under Harry's guidance, these students learn to fight not just with spells, but with information, misdirection, and unity, skills as Slytherin as they are heroic. The battle in the ministry that ends the 5th year leaves scars visible and invisible. A loss that tears through Harry's heart reshapes him. But grief in this version does not simply push him toward rage. It deepens his understanding of vulnerability, of how pain can be weaponized by both enemies and allies. He returns to school in the 6th year with sharper senses and a heavier soul, but also with clearer purpose. He sees how easily fear drives people into the arms of those who promise control. He watches classmates wrestle with family loyalties, propaganda, and threats that lurk behind closed doors. The tension in the Slytherin common room becomes unbearable as some students slip closer to darkness while others quietly resist. His relationship with the brooding potions master evolves as that man becomes head of the house. Private conversations crackle with hostility, with grudges older than Harry himself, but also with something unspoken that feels like duty twisted by regret. Snape teaches Harry to shield his mind, not as a favor, but as a warning. The man's bitterness is a constant reminder of how ambition can be poisoned by misplaced loyalty. In quiet moments, Harry begins to see Snape not as a villain, nor as a hero, but as a living monument to the complexity of choice, the very theme that has shaped Harry's path since the Sorting Hat's whisper. Discovering a battered old textbook filled with clever notes also hits differently in this timeline. For a boy raised among cunning peers, shortcuts and enhanced spells are temptations wrapped in legitimacy. Using one particularly vicious spell in a moment of anger becomes a mirror he cannot ignore. The horror he feels afterward is not just at the damage done, but at the sudden, chilling recognition that the path he fears most is always 2 steps away. Students watch him closely afterward, some wary, others impressed, a few disturbingly excited. Harry realizes then that his choices influence not just his destiny, but the future shape of his entire house. When the school finally falls under direct enemy occupation in the 7th year, Slytherin becomes both shield and prison. The new rulers assume loyalty from the green-clad students, giving them freedoms denied to others. Some exploit this, others resist quietly. Harry moves within these cracks like someone who has spent years learning how to breathe in hostile terrain. He passes messages under watchful eyes, protects students targeted for their blood or defiance, and works with allies hidden in every corner of the castle. For many terrified students, he becomes the proof that Slytherin does not have to bow to darkness. In the final battle, as spells turn corridors into ruins and ancient stones tremble, the role of Harry's house becomes pivotal. Some students flee, desperate to escape the war, but others remain. They fight beside Gryffindors, Hufflepuffs, and Ravenclaws, not because tradition demands it, but because Harry's example has given them a different blueprint for ambition, one where rising means lifting others, not crushing them. The Great Hall fills with flashes of green light, red sparks, crumbling banisters, and the screams of clashing loyalties. And somewhere amid that chaos, the image of a Slytherin dueling Death Eaters becomes a symbol of a house reclaiming its narrative. Harry's walk into the forest, wand at his side, heart steady in the face of death, remains one of the most defining moments of his life. But here, it carries the added weight of everything he has learned within the stone walls beneath the lake. He understands manipulation now. He understands the hunger for power and the fear that drives people toward it. He has seen good people break and cruel people soften. He has watched ambition destroy families and save lives. When he meets the pale, broken soul of the enemy in that silent, white space, he does not only feel hatred. He feels the tragedy of someone who chose the darkest interpretation of the traits they once shared. When he returns to life and steps back into the battle, he does so not as a symbol of one house or another, but as a bridge between all of them. His final confrontation with the Dark Wizard is not just light versus darkness. It is the culmination of every lesson learned in a house feared by many and misunderstood by more. The wand chooses its allegiance, the spell rebounds. And the boy who once walked into the Great Hall under green and silver ends the war not by embracing destiny, but by choosing every step of it. After the dust settles and the world begins to rebuild, Slytherin House faces its reckoning. Parents still whisper warnings, old prejudices cling stubbornly. But they cannot ignore the Slytherin who faced death without seeking domination, who led without demanding loyalty, who shattered stereotypes simply by surviving with integrity. Younger students begin to speak of ambition as a tool rather than a curse. Teachers find themselves rethinking the assumptions that colored their discipline. And the green and silver banners take on a new meaning, not cleansed of history, but transformed by it. Harry does not become a saint. He does not shed his sharpness or his strategic mind, but he carries those traits forward with intention. He understands the weight of labels, the pressure of expectations, and the fragile power of choice. And in every path he walks after the war, he proves that placing him in Slytherin did not corrupt him. It sharpened him. It taught him to see angles others miss, to resist manipulation, to value loyalty earned rather than inherited, and to wield power without letting it hollow him out. The boy who lived becomes the man who chose. And in choosing again and again to turn the strengths of Slytherin toward protection instead of control, he rewrites not only his own story, but the legacy of a house that needed one honest, impossible example to begin changing.